When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
I'd like to bring in also Adam Bolton. Adam, what did you make of what we've just seen?
I apologise in advance to Times Radio listeners. I said that J.D. Vance was a piece of shit. And I think that will be the impression of the rest of the world. There will be shock and confirmation of their worst suspicions about the new administration. You know, I've been in the Oval Office many times with visiting British prime ministers. This is no way to treat the elected leader of a nation at war, and which the United States is supposed to still be in alliance with.
Quiet Riot. Hello, and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the weekend amuse to our midweek boosh. I'm Naomi.
And I'm Alex.
Where do we begin?
I know, right?
Crumbs.
Hi. I'm still processing, to be honest, as we record on Saturday. And I'm sure a bunch of stuff will happen between now and tomorrow morning when this goes out. And I have a not insignificant suspicion that we might be doing a midnight mass on Sunday evening.
Indeed, after the defence meeting.
It's a massive moment, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
And I said it a little bit on Wednesday. It's not so much that the world has changed, that the world has finally realised how much the world had already changed. And for those for whom the penny hadn't already dropped, my God, it's dropped today. And my overriding feeling this morning is just this renewed anger about the decision to leave the EU and the amount of foreign interference and Russian interference that was behind a lot of that campaign. And somebody dug out a Carol Cadwallader tweet from 2018, which is so apt still. It was saying that you can't disentangle Trump from Brexit because they very much are one and the same things. They are the same companies. It is the same data. It is the same Facebook. It is the same Russians, the same Cambridge Analytica, the same Bannon, the same Farage. All of the actors that helped to deliver Trump are the same ones that helped to deliver Brexit. And when I think back to why I was so exercised to be involved in the referendum campaign in 2016, it was, of course, my pro-Europeanism, but under it was this terrifying angst of what leaving the EU would unleash. And I just think we're still seeing that playing out wider and larger and in a more tyrannical way across the whole world now. Well, look, we're going to get into all of that on the show in a lot more detail. But first up, an enormous thank you to everyone who has already signed up to support us. And it's allowing us to push forward with some really exciting new projects that we'll be able to tell you about soon. If you're new here and enjoy our shows, please head over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod, where for as little as a $5, you get access to our behind the scenes conference calls, our Discord channel, and more.
We believe that good content should not be behind a paywall while disinformation is pushed into our feeds. So we promise to make all our episodes available free to everyone with no restrictions and no delays. We trust that those of you who can support us financially will do so. And those of you who cannot afford it will help in other ways by giving us a rating, a review, telling your friends, spreading the word on socials.
So, Alex, we, of course, have to talk about Zelensky's Oval Office meeting with Trump and Vance following those of Starmer and Macron. And, of course, the now even more important pan-European defence summit happening here in the UK today. It scarcely feels as if there's going to be anything else worth talking about.
I would like to focus a little bit also on the complicity of the media in much of this and the role in general, because I have some thoughts about it.
Okay, good. Well, that is going to be more than enough for us to sink our teeth into today. So let's crack on with the show. Quiet Riot. During our Thursday show with James O'Brien, Alex, we discussed what a good trip to Washington for Starmer might look like. That was 3 days ago. And they used to say that a week was a long time in politics. And a mere 72 hours later, everything has changed. The world has changed. How the world is going to react to all of this has changed. But if we go back to reviewing how it went for Starmer, he gritted his teeth. He tried to make the best of a very difficult political situation, striking a balance between pandering to the orange narcissist with a very unprecedented invitation for a second state visit on behalf of the king, and standing his ground to correct the president, as Macron had done a couple of days before, on the terms of UK aid to Ukraine. And while no military backstops were guaranteed by the US, the meeting probably couldn't have gone much better for the PM under the circumstances, much to the deep, deep dismay of the right-wing media commentators, most of whom led with Starmer the Charmer headlines or seized on Trump's suggestions of a very quick trade deal between the UK and the US being possible. Now, all of that was made easier to happen because of Starmer's announcement earlier in the week to increase defence spending and slashing foreign aid. It'll have oiled the cogs for the meeting. At home, however, that has, of course, led to his fourth front bench resignation, with International Development Minister Annalisa Dodds quitting her post once Starmer had arrived back in Blighty. Important to point that she didn't do anything to potentially upset how that trip went. The PM, as we mentioned, is playing host to, I think there might even be like 18, 20 European leaders, including Volodymyr Zelensky, attending a summit on defence and security today. I think NATO's Mark Rutte, Ursula von der Leyen, they're all in town for it. And that summit is now effectively a crisis meeting, following the absolutely horrific Oval Office encounter between Zelensky, Trump and Vance on Friday. And by now, we've no doubt that listeners will have watched with anger and despair that televised interaction between the three, and will be wondering what the hell comes next. No mineral deal was signed. Zelensky's trip was cut short. He was unceremoniously asked to leave the White House. And laughing all the way into the weekend, of course, will have been President Putin. Alex, I want to ask you about the choreography of last week. From my perspective, it looked like Macron and Starmer, like the fluffers, sent in to warm things up, stroke the ego, pander to Trump's sense of self-importance in order to make him purr loudly enough to be willing to play nicely on peace in Ukraine. And then Zelensky is meant to come in and do the close. And all of the briefings were that a minerals deal would be signed, that the world's press were all briefing. This is what's going to happen. Today is going to be the day that that deal gets done. It was more or less a given. In your view, having watched it and rewatched it, what the fuck went wrong?
Look, there's no way to know. There's 2 or 3 dominant schools of thought, and they're all worth looking at. One was that this was always going to happen. It was always leading to this. And that the work that European leaders had done up until this point was basically to not give Trump an easy out, as it were.
Yeah.
To bring this to a head so that basically everyone would have complete clarity about precisely what's going on. And I think, regardless of whether that was the intention or not, things are clearer today than they were a couple of days ago. The second school of thought is that this was a sort of reaction, as we have seen so often, based in the moment, possibly engineered by J.D. Vance, who saw that the meeting was kind of going all right and threw a couple of Molotov cocktails in the mix to wind Trump up. He's not a difficult person to wind. And I think it is notable that Vance intervened twice, and twice he suggested that Zelensky was disrespecting Trump and disrespecting America in some way, because I think that is the quickest way to wind Trump up. And the third school of thought is, of course, that Trump and Vance are Putin's instruments. It was them machinating, as it were, to make this moment of public humiliation happen for Zelensky, in order to make Zelensky's position going forward untenable, in order to say the obstacle to a peace deal is him personally, therefore Europe and Ukraine need to work to remove him in order to install someone with whom we, America, can do business. Like I said, all three have their merits, all three are worth looking at, all three ultimately, in terms of what we need to do, leads to the same conclusion. So in many ways,
it doesn't particularly matter.
It will be nice to find out in 20 years' time when someone writes a book about it, what actually happened. But it's not directly relevant to what Europe does now.
Former United States ambassador to the United Nations, former national security advisor to President Obama. Ambassador Susan Rice is here. Ambassador, your reaction?
Obviously, it's a very sad day and an embarrassment for the United States on the world stage. But let's step back and analyze what's happened here. I think there's no question that this was a setup. You heard Donald Trump say at the end of that clip you played, this is great television. This was a setup. Volodymyr Zelensky was compelled to agree to a horrible deal without any concrete security guarantees. And yet, because he was trying to improve a relationship with Donald Trump, he came to Washington, he came to the Oval Office and sat down for a meeting, hat in hand. And soon after he got there, the Vice President of the United States lit into him and started a confrontation. Now, I've been in countless Oval Office meetings with heads of state, presidents and vice presidents, as national security advisor, as UN ambassador, and in other roles. I can tell you that the vice president, they don't jump in, hijack a conversation without the express blessing of the president of the United States. So J.D. Vance did that deliberately. Donald Trump knew what he was going to do. And I think, as he said at the end, because he can't, help himself, this was a setup for the cameras. It was a play to his base, but above all, it was a play to Vladimir Putin, to show fealty to Vladimir Putin and to try to humiliate Zelensky. But Zelensky didn't play along with the script, because Zelensky's got dignity and guts, and Zelensky has people that he democratically represents. And as a result, he couldn't sit there in silence as lies were being told about how the war was started, whose responsibility it was, to suggest that he was not thankful. I can't count the number of times that Zelensky has thanked the American people, the American government, the President of the United States for the critical support that we provided. It's not about gratitude. It was an effort to humiliate him, to scuttle the U.S.-Ukraine relationship so that Trump no longer feels any obligation to provide support, and to hand U.S. interests and Ukraine and potentially Europe to Putin on a silver platter.
Quiet Riot. This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock. Quiet Riot.
I mean, I've said before in the show that while I always hope a ceasefire is possible and peace restored, that the two sides of Ukraine and Russia are so wildly far apart from one another that it is currently extremely unlikely. And at best, I just don't think Trump ever appreciated that. Oh, he wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Everything is transactional. If I slap money on the table, I can get these guys to agree because everyone thinks about things in financial terms. I can come in and get my checkbook out. And that's the best interpretation, that he just didn't have the handle on the reality of the conflict that is happening, that he just simply doesn't understand the geopolitics at play.
And there is some support for that, right? Because for him to turn around and ask Zelensky, why do you hate this guy so much? I mean,
yeah,
it's beyond the pale to ask the leader of the country that has been invaded, who has lost hundreds of thousands of people to this aggression, to ask him, why don't you like Putin? It is just bonkers by any conceivable logic.
Yep, completely. So that I think is the best interpretation. And the worst is, of course, that he does want Russia to win. And he is siding very obviously now with a tyrannical dictator, which again feeds into everything we know about how he views strong men. I don't know if he's a strong man or not, but King Charles III has now, I think, been put in a pretty difficult position. Lots and lots of people calling for the invitation to be rescinded. I personally doubt it will be, but I suspect it's kicked into the long grass and that the visit may never actually happen. What do you think, Alex?
I mean, I think it's interesting the way the invitation is structured, which is something that I hadn't realized right away. And the way the invitation is structured is that there is first a personal visit to, I think, Balmoral, during which the details of the state visit will be discussed. And the state visit is to come at some later point. And that seems to me quite an elegant way to structure it so that it can be dangled, but possibly never actually granted. I'm not of the school of thought that Starmer should be making grand statements online and cancelling the visit, etc., etc. There were a lot of people saying, with every European leader having lined up to throw their vociferous support behind Zelensky, Starmer's absence was notable. But Starmer was the only one of the leaders who actually spoke to Zelensky and to Trump before making a statement through the spokesperson in Downing Street that the UK's support for Ukraine was unequivocal. And to me, that's a more responsible way to run a country. Others might disagree. I don't want to see knee-jerk reactions. And most important of all, I don't think people know what is going on behind the scenes.
So, I'm sure we don't.
What I'm trying to say is that the notion of EU leaders condemning Trump and Starmer being the outlier that keeps a line of communication, the conduit through which something can try to be rescued or salvaged, is very likely to be a coordinated European response. And I think people are quite short-sighted in believing that somehow closing lines of communication with America is a good idea. I don't think America is North Korea. I don't think it's Iran. I don't think you can isolate it. Our defense systems are technologically integrated to the hilt. Our intelligence agencies are integrated to the hilt. This disentangling that does need to happen will take years and must be handled as carefully as possible. People are saying, isolate the US, make a statement, no more. What does that look like? Like, do we call back our diplomatic staff? We haven't even done that with Russia, by the way. Do we stop sharing intelligence through Five Eyes? Do we cancel AUKUS? What does that look like in practice beyond an easy Twitter statement that people want to see?
What I liked was that Starmer had spoken to both. And then shortly after that, Zelensky does quite a long interview on Fox. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah, I heard
And that's
it.
where he says, I'm thankful to the Americans and to Trump, and I am always thankful to the people of America for their support, and I will hope that we can continue this dialogue and things like that. So I wonder whether that was a Starmer briefing to him, like the way you need to rescue this is to go and do that quickly now. So I am totally with you on there could well be a good cop, bad cop scenario that has been authorized by other world leaders. Right, Starmer, you're the guy that's going to go and be good cop. We'll play bad cop on Twitter, wherever else. That said, it is disappointing for me. I think both are possible. And I think to put out a statement through a number 10 Spock saying, and of course we support Ukraine, is weaker than just saying it yourself. You can have done the phone call to both Trump and Zelensky and also say, of course, we recommit to supporting Ukraine and they are the victim, not the aggressor.
So what was missing in the statement?
Well, it didn't come from him. It does feel horrible to be British with all the other European leaders coming out in defence, and for our leader not to have done that so overtly. And yeah, you can use calmer and kinder words. I thought Merz was very good in his statement. I don't think any of them is a particularly hyperbolic leader that's trying to damage ties with the US either. I mean, Germany sells far more kit to the US than we do, and tariffs are going to have an enormous impact on Germany.
Well, it's funny you should mention tariffs, though. The fact is that EU leaders are already in a trade war with the US, and the UK is not.
I mean, I don't agree because, well, look, let's unpack. There's a lot going on here. We've sort of jumped from geopolitics into trade, and the two are, of course, very intrinsically
related.
Trump is a transactional guy, tariff man. He doesn't understand many, many things, but he thinks he understands the art of a good business deal. And he is dangling the prospect of a trade agreement. Great, fast, brilliant, it'll happen really quickly. It's possible. UK-US trade deal. And many in the UK will find that attractive, despite the fact that it doesn't do a huge amount for UK GDP. Last government's predictions were about 0.16% growth from a full-fat FTA with the US. Then there's the politics of delivering that deal and what the US would demand from the UK, probably access to our healthcare system in some shape or form, and almost certainly the entrance of their animal products into our market, chlorinated chicken, hormone beef, etc. So politically, for any government, but particularly a Labour government, I think almost impossible to ride that one out. And then on the other hand, you've got the prospect of doing more trade with the EU that delivers magnitudes more economic growth at a much lower political risk to them. And the danger is with Trump dangling that deal that we are left bobbing around mid-Atlantic tethered to neither markets, because the EU will say, well, if you're even vaguely considering a trade deal with those guys, we'll put our negotiations with you on improving the deal on ice until you figured out what that looks like, because we simply cannot risk doing a deal with you that might mean at some point those products enter our market at much lower quality standards than we're prepared to accept. But I think what you're asking about is, given that the UK is in a very different position, would Macron have been as bullish last night on social media or I don't think he was. He did an interview, he did a piece to camera, didn't he? On it?
Yeah. He was in He was on a visit to Portugal, I think.
Yeah. He would have been quite so bullish if Trump hadn't, post the Macron visit, said, no, we're definitely going to put tariffs on the EU. I don't get the sense that for many of them, it is so much about that as it is about the realization of the fascist world that the far right in America, who are now in control of swathes of the legislature and executive and judiciary, are now, that is the new world order. And I think they are Europeans that remember how we got to the EU in the first place and the reasons for it. And I do think that they are realizing that we've got to defend ourselves, that this is no longer our friend on many fronts, not just economic.
I don't disagree on any of that. All I'm looking for is an acknowledgement that relations-wise, the UK is not in exactly the same space as the EU vis-a-vis the Trump White House, which I think is just fact, right? It's not in the same place. And that may well be a really good thing for Europe and Ukraine, and is worth preserving. It is worth preserving that conduit. It is worth having one voice in our camp that Trump considers not entirely hostile to him. That has to be right.
I don't know. I think it was all quite a performative. Oh, la, 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 look at this man sucking up to me and telling me how unprecedented it is for me to get the only person in history to get 2 state visits
and
from
yet he
a
took
royal.
his call last night.
Sorry?
And yet he took his call last night.
He did, but I'm sure he spoke to other people last night as well. We don't know.
So would he have taken Macron's? Macron having made that statement, would he have taken his call? I'm not sure. Is it worth holding off on the grand statement until you've made that call? I think yes. That's all.
Yeah, but if you've made the call and you still don't do the grand statement, look, there are a lot of people very, very, very disappointed that we are now in a very different world of desperate democratic backsliding, increasing nationalism and protectionism that is manifesting in some truly, truly atrocious war crimes and other things happening all over. This is a desperate era. It's hard to overstate how this moment right now could be our mid-1930s. And I just don't want Britain to be on the wrong side of history on this one. I take your point entirely. I do think it's useful for Starmer to be a conduit if he can. I just don't know that Trump respects him that much. And I think we could be in danger of overplaying how well received Starmer is by Trump.
On the World War II parallels, which I tend to shy away from, but I think are appropriate in this case, there is definitely a darkness amassing in some way, and we have to figure out our response to it. But I do think that the constant references to a fragment of that history, ignoring that administration changed in the White House during that period, that there were American administrations that were seriously considering doing a deal with Hitler.
Yeah, I know.
That Churchill had to go to Moscow and eat dirt several times to get Russia on side, to get that dictator on side, that he had to side with Mao Zedong during that.
Look, America often aren't our friends. It's not new.
Yeah, what I mean is these situations are fluid. You will end up in bed with some unsavory people somewhere. No one is doubting the importance of Erdogan in all this, for instance.
Yeah.
I could do a 2-hour program about what Erdogan is doing in Turkey and how he's a dictator.
He could end up being a crucial player,
in that context. So we may have to get in bed with some quite unsavory people. Let's not fast forward to the point where the dividing lines in history are very, very clear to us, because we're not there yet. My worry is that we will get to Sunday, they will all gather, and you will see 2 or 3 of the people who were making very strong Twitter statements on Thursday actually go, how much will that cost us? I don't know if I can spend on defense. Who will be controlling it? Can we be part of the table? Will we have a veto? What about fish quotas? So...
Yeah, the danger is that all we get is a political statement of intent.
Twitter statements are easy, is what I'm trying to say. Europe needs to say less and do a lot more. And it hasn't been doing enough really since November, when this situation was clear. It was clear that this was coming.
I've been saying for months and months and months, we need to give Ukraine everything it needs to defeat Putin, because it is in our interest. He won't stop at the border of Ukraine.
Quiet Riot. This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Pet injury is an additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
Quiet Riot. We need a call to action, Alex. And I called Arthur last night and I said, I want to give some money right now to Ukraine itself. I don't want to give it to, charities that do aid work or anything like that. I want to give money to Ukraine. And he said that he knows the brilliant team that run the Ukraine arm of One Team, One Fight, and tells us if you want to give cash directly to the war effort, this is a great place to start, and that Harry and Dima, who run the organisation, are modern day legends. So we'll leave a link in the show notes to their site. There are kind of different crowdfunding pots on there that you can give to depending on where you'd like your money to go.
Let's say it as well, because sometimes people have difficulty accessing the notes. So it's oneteamonefight.org. The ones being number one, word team, number one, word fight.org.
And we can also pin a link to that at the top of our Blue Sky for a day or so.
Yes, we'll
so that people can see it.
Okay, postscript, guys, we're adding this bit in several hours after we recorded because, drumroll, Zelensky is attending the Summit of European Leaders today and he's meeting the King. The bilat with Zelensky and Starmer today seems to have gone very well indeed, culminating in the signing of a fresh £2.3 billion loan to Ukraine, which Finance Minister Marchenko said on social media was insured by UK frozen Russian assets, which makes it all extra delicious. So even if talks today are just that, at least Zelensky goes home with some cash from the UK. But before heading back to Kyiv, he's going to be in Sandringham to meet the King. And while it's not the bells and whistles version of the invite delivered to Trump by Selma last week, it is nonetheless a strong symbolic representation that the UK stands firmly with Ukraine and not Putin. And the cherry on top is that it is really going to piss off the orange mobster in the White House. So I'm very encouraged by the UK demonstrating more leadership on this issue as the day has gone on, putting its money where its mouth is, and I hope it's going to inspire other European leaders to do likewise, especially those not even yet meeting the NATO threshold of spending 2% of GDP on defence. Here's looking at you, Meloni. So I'm feeling more upbeat going to bed on Saturday night, and I just hope nothing major changes for the worse overnight. And I have to re-record this again. Anyway, I'm going to hand over to Alex now because he does love to have the last word, and I'm nice like that. Bye.
The bloody cheek of that Naomi. She's right, though. I do like the last word. And on this, I really feel I deserve it. Hopefully now people understand what I mean about leaders needing to say less and do more. Not everyone reacts the same way. If we genuinely value diversity, if we really believe that everything from a country down to a small company is enriched by a mix of people, we have to live that value at the highest levels of leadership. Some leaders will react quickly with raw emotion. Others will be more cerebral. Some, and I think Starmer is in this category, will consider it their duty on such a vital and explosive issue to take time to gather all the available information before being sure of their decision. None of the approaches is invalid. Together, they provide a sort of tensile strength. I just think that sometimes we as a public need to take a collective breath and think whether the speed and certainty that we demand is designed to force an error. Deliberation is not evidence of equivocation. Speed does not always result in constancy. Declamation does not equal leadership. Calmness is not a form of appeasement. The warmth that Starmer showed to Zelensky seemed to me real, human, and badly needed. I actually found it very touching. The UK solidarity was backed up by action, and all of it was done in a way which avoided even engaging with Trump's reality TV narrative. Everything Starmer said was freestanding. It was the UK's position, nothing more, nothing less. It was defined by opposition to Russia and support for Zelensky, rather than opposition to or support for Trump. Now, there will be many more difficult days ahead. Zelensky will probably be counseled to debase himself further and apologize. It will be sickening to watch. A deal may be arrived at that is unpalatable, unfair. Many indignities more will be suffered. The only thing that matters now is for the political will to exist to disentangle our continent from a now unreliable and dangerous partner, and for the time to be gained to do that safely. We will bite the inside of our cheek and smile and say, "Yes, dear," while preparing our escape.
Quiet riot.
My job is to watch and read the news, which is not easy at the moment. That means I scour everything, Fox, CNN, GBB's, everything. And I've been doing it for years now. So I can spot patterns. I see trends in the reporting and the underlying narratives that creep through into the questions of politicians. And I was really struck by the questions that British media fielded at Starmer in the Oval Office, with Trump sitting right there, with the entire US team sitting right there.
Mr. President, does the Prime Minister have to choose a closer relationship with the EU as he is seeking and a good trade relationship with you? Which one should he go for? Are you worried about Britain potentially undoing some of the benefits of Brexit by seeking a closer tie with the EU, who you said was set up to screw?
No, I don't worry about that.
Prime Minister, you've talked about putting British soldiers' boots on the ground in Ukraine in the event that President Trump succeeds with his peace deal. But can you do that without a firm assurance that America will have our back in the form of some kind of security guarantee were Putin to breach that agreement? And, Mr. President, tomorrow you're seeing President Zelensky to sign this deal on minerals and energy that could be hugely important to the United States. Will you take the opportunity to apologise to him for calling him a dictator while praising Vladimir Putin, who is a dictator?
You said yesterday that the EU was constructed to screw the US when it comes to trade. What can our Prime Minister say to you to persuade you not to impose tariffs?
Mr. Starmer, the Prime Minister, has said that he believes that Vladimir Putin would be at risk of invading Ukraine again without a sufficient backstop. Do you think that Vladimir Putin would be likely to invade again in the event of a peace deal?
Prime Minister, do you think that Vladimir Putin is a man who will keep his word? Thanks.
Thank you. So does that mean there won't be any sanctions on the UK then?
On a personal level, Mr. President, what do you get on most? What's your common ground with Sir Keir Starmer? Because you're both from different political backgrounds.
Mr. President, Keir Starmer has signed a deal to give away the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. Will you approve that deal?
Mr. President, you've said you're working on a new trade deal with Britain, which we of course welcome. President Obama once said Britain was at the back of the queue for that trade deal. Where are we now? When do you think we're going to see that? And Prime Minister, the BBC has today admitted serious flaws over the recent Gaza coverage, suggestions of payments made to people linked to Hamas. Does the BBC still have your trust? Thank you.
Mr. President, it sounds as though one of you completely trusts President Putin and one of you doesn't trust him an inch. Have I got that right? And why do you trust him?
Mr. President, you talked about having common ground with Keir Starmer, but there are things you disagree on as well. You described Zelensky as a dictator. He describes President Putin as a dictator. Do you see that as a problem?
Do you see any situation where US forces could be deployed as a backstop in a peacekeeping operation in direct confrontation with Russian forces?
Just to follow up on that, if British troops are in Ukraine keeping the peace and get attacked by Russia, will you come to their aid?
Mr. President, while we have the Vice President here, are you both disappointed that the AfD didn't come first in the German elections, given your previous support for them?
The US media was asking about things that were relevant to the meeting we've just seen, right? And then the UK media came in and were asking questions intended to either enrage Trump or trip up Starmer and get a gotcha. And I thought it was really noticeable. I was left with the impression that the British media did not understand, like they completely failed to grasp the magnitude and gravity of the moment. It felt like what they were doing was tonally no different to them questioning Boris Johnson about the gold wallpaper or a junior minister that's been caught going to a brothel. And it left me with a really bitter taste. Like when you're sitting in the White House and you're dealing with a really fragile thing that's just been stitched together, there is, I think, a national interest point to not
just
to make
shit all over it
live on air.
I hadn't quite picked up on the point that you had, because I didn't watch it in detail at the time. I was in and out of meetings all day long. That there were effectively a press pack trying to disrupt a very delicate diplomatic setup.
I find it interesting that, for instance, every newspaper the next day was referring to the Chagos deal on its front page, whereas for weeks before it was either the Chagos surrender or some sort of derogatory noun. And I did also see parallels with this very concerted push to foment a sort of market panic in January about Rachel Reeves and 30-year gilts and all of that. And as soon as that started to normalize, apparently nobody was interested in it anymore. It does create a question in my mind on whether that estate is working for the national interest or against it at times.
I think not. And you're going to be doing a brilliant interview with Peter Gagan, spoiler alert, everybody, about his brilliant long read in the London Review of Books about Paul Marshall, the hedge fund tycoon who now owns a significant chunk of the British media. And I think the ownership of our media is a huge part of it. I think the cuts that they faced have been a huge part of it. We don't have quality investigative journalism on scale in the way that we did previously. And we don't have journalists, and particularly lobby journalists, with a sense of history. And they don't recall things in the way that you so often do very well when you're doing social media for Best for Britain. I remember when this guy said something completely different 3 years ago, and you'll find the clip and smash it out to kind of prove that this is a hypocrisy or U-turn or whatever it is. And our media just seem incapable of doing that. But I think there is something even darker about our media and the chilling effect it has on civil society and charities and business are so fearful of speaking out on any issue that doesn't fit with the right-wing media narrative now, because the right-wing media have shown that nobody is off the table. Of course, we all remember the enemies of the people headlines, judges, courts, doctors, civil servants, nurses. No one is beyond being rebuked and shamed and cancelled anymore. So the chilling
by
effect
some offshore millionaire who has
a
particular agenda, right?
Pushing an agenda. And so what does that mean? Well, that means in my job, when I am trying to persuade government that there are far more economic benefits to achieve their growth ambitions by pursuing an alignment deal with Europe than there are from other things. And rightly, they will want business to row in and show support. But because it is notionally linked to the B word, Brexit, they're terrified to do it. And they're terrified because they know that the Daily Mail will know that their customers, their suppliers, will have had an enormous number of people within them that did vote to leave the European Union. And they just won't think twice about trying to destroy them. So corporate affairs directors around the world say to the CEO and the chairman, we understand that you completely agree with the economics of this, that it will be good for the bottom line, that it'll help us bring prices down, it'll help us recruit more easily and create more jobs and grow the business. But please just don't say any of it out loud. And that is terribly desperate for the state of our democracy and how we should be functioning and how channels of communication should flow and work. And if we're all muzzled by Murdoch and his ilk and Paul Marshall and Rothermere's and whomever else, then the accountability isn't happening, the dialogue is not happening, the honest conversation, that is not freedom of speech.
Quiet Riot. Watch the world's biggest tennis stars clash in the California desert at the BNP Paribas Open, live on Tennis Channel.
How do they get to these shots?
Tune in daily for exclusive first ball to last coverage from Indian Wells and witness all of the jaw-dropping action as the game's top men and women square off at one of the greatest events in sports. It's tennis magic you need to see to believe. The BNP Paribas Open, live on Tennis Channel and streaming on the Tennis Channel app.
Quiet Riot. Now, before we go, Alex, while I've got a Greek at my disposal, among the news that's been completely dominated by Zelensky's visit, I have seen pockets of disruption happening in Athens. And I confess I don't really know a huge amount about it, other than that it's linked to that terrible train incident a few years ago. Can you bring me up to speed in a kind of 5-minute roundup, please?
I have to say, I'm not an expert on this. What I can tell you is what I hear in friends groups and family groups, and they post photos and newspaper pieces. So I have a better understanding, I guess, than someone else, but it's not deep. And I will get someone who is expert on this to talk to in a couple of weeks when the dust settles and we can get a sort of better idea of what's going on. But the brief version is this. So on 28th of February, 2023, a passenger train filled with students collided head-on with a freight train in an area called Tempe, which has become now the shorthand name, the Tempe disaster in Greece. 57 people were killed. Many of them were sort of 18, 19-year-olds. Many have been left with life-altering injuries. It has become a sort of painful symbol of a decade of infrastructure neglect, which is connected, of course, to austerity and the Eurozone crisis. So it has become this totemic thing. To give you an idea, when polled, 82% of Greeks consider this the top issue. Almost 7 in 10 consider that there's been no satisfactory explanation and there's been no justice for the people who died. So what happened? This was the anniversary coming up. There's been some leaks from a sort of report that was commissioned into it, and it's seen as a complete whitewash. There is a widespread belief that the government has suppressed evidence to do with it, that make the government look good, and tried to blame just human error, the driver, whatever. And all of that has fallen apart under close examination. So we're not talking about some conspiracy theory here. There is clear evidence that the government tried to suppress what was going on. It is basically the equivalent of what happened with Hillsborough. It is that huge an issue. On the anniversary, on the 28th, what happened was that there were mass protests. There was a general strike. Protests were going on all weekend, and they weren't confined just to Athens, where some violence did break out. But the main demonstration was largely peaceful. But it went on in every city in Greece, in Patra, in Tripoli, in Thessaloniki, in everywhere. And the numbers were huge for the population of that place, right? And what is really making the Greek government absolutely skid its pants is that this is not partisan. There's no one behind this. No one is organizing this. This is completely grassroots directed anger, real anger from people who think it's been completely whitewashed and they want some sort of justice for the people who died.
Good on them. I'd love to know a bit more about whether there is linked to this any renewed sense of anger towards the EU for the post-crash era.
Not particularly, I have to say, because economically Greece is sort of out of that stage now. And also because this goes way before austerity as well. You know, this goes into decades of corruption and venality and people skimming money left, right, and center from contracts while everything is put together shoddily with sticky tape. it really is a culmination of all those things that have been eating away, all those corrosive things that were eating away underneath Greek society.
Right. Well, I think we should probably wrap things up.
Yeah, I've got loads of Podyssey stuff to be doing. The trailer will be out, I can tell people, on Sunday. So I know. So listeners, thank you ever so much for lending us your ears this Sunday morning. And do remember to head over to ko-fi.com/QuietRiotPod to sign up and support us if you can.
And if you can't, make sure you're following us on social media at Quiet Riot Pod. And don't forget, you can email us with feedback to quietriotpod@gmail.com. We're going to be back next week with a couple of extra shows, as well as our regular one on Thursday. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your weekend as best you can in these very worrying times.
Stay safe, take a breath, step away from social media if you need to. We love you lots and lots. Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet Riot.